a first half of drama on Sportsound.
A season of action and reaction.
It is a stonewall penalty kick. I was astonished at it.
Astonished that people disagree with you.
The new league season kicks off this weekend.
Scottish football lives here. BBC Radio Scotland.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Radio Scotland.
Hello and welcome to a Scottish Football Podcast and a Premiership preview edition. This time we are running the rule over Rangers. I'm David Currie. With me is BBC commentator Alistair Lamont, and our special guest is Josh Barrie of the Rangers Review. How are you, Josh?
I'm good. Late night last night watching Servette and Genk. A bit of a surprise on there for Rangers in their next Champions League qualifying round. But looking forward to that.
Aye. Al, he's of the Rangers Review, but for this one, I'm afraid it's a Rangers preview. You're all right with that, Josh, aren't you?
I actually heard, David, your joke before. I think it was the Hearts podcast, or was it the Aberdeen podcast, the Barbie and Oppenheimer joke, and that got a laugh out of me, to be fair. So that was
all right. Job
not
done.
Quite as good as we'll take it.
I think that's a first, isn't it?
I know. Write that down. I'll write that down in my journals. Now, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of last season, my perception was that Rangers fans seemed more chipper than maybe a trophyless term would warrant. Despite Celtic winning the treble, they'd lost their manager. Did that take a wee bit of the edge off of the pain?
I think that the ending last season was a strange season, wasn't it? Because you obviously you go into the season on the highs of the season before, when Rangers almost that group of players almost became kind of immortal. Then you've got to start climbing the mountain again. There's maybe not as much perceived as investment as was necessary. I think you see that the change that's happened this summer and following last season is a reflection to the kind of stagnation that just existed last season, and you really felt that on the pitch. But Michael Beale came in, and you're right, it was trophyless, and on the front of things it was nowhere near good enough. But I think after a difficult year, there was a real there was optimism that people could see, okay, I can see where this manager is going. I can see a clear style of play. I can see a route to success, even if it's not there just now, because you look at where Rangers kind of fell short. And I think that was issues that had to be addressed in the transfer market. So you're right, it's a bit of a strange position to be in. The amount of change that's happened on the park this summer has been seismic. I mean, how many clubs have signed 9 players this summer, all of which, or most of which, are designated to be starters. I think there's a lot of anticipation about a lot of the signings, about what Beale can do with his players, but there'll just be so much pressure on that first game against Kilmarnock, because for all the anticipation, for all the goodwill, as everyone knows, it's just all about results here, isn't it?
Did you, Al, have the feeling as the season went on that maybe Rangers under Beale were narrowing the gap a wee bit in terms of quality on Ange Postecoglou's Celtic?
Maybe slightly. I think the acquisition of Nicola Raskin and Todd Cantwell in January helped do that. Those two players, clearly players that Michael Beale had identified early, and ones that he knew he could add to his squad during the season. But that was, to an extent, he was essentially working with Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's squad that he inherited, and he had to make the best of that. I think he did try to change to the style of play that he wanted, try to mould the players into the kind of team that he wanted them to be, and at times you certainly saw the fruits of that labour. I think there were still periods where I often thought that Michael Beale's sides would either start very slowly and then need some sort of half-time rollicking to get them going, or they would start really well and you would think, all right, okay, this is them playing under Michael Beale now, and then second half they would fall away. For my money, they put in very few 90-minute performances, which you kind of have to do if you're going to try and compete with the likes of Ange Postecoglou's Celtic. So, yeah, I mean, you saw at the tail end of the season, Celtic fans would tell you it was completely meaningless. For Rangers fans, I think less so. But the win over Celtic at Ibrox, it was a good performance. Celtic clearly went at their best. They'd already won the league. But yeah, there was signs of positivity certainly. I think it's a very, very interesting campaign coming up, because I don't know about Josh, but for the most part, I like to think of myself as a little bit of a football scholar, but most of the players
That's the best joke in the podcast so far.
Aye, all right. Okay. But, for the most part, those players that have come in aren't ones that I'm familiar with. Certainly not guys that I've seen play very often. So I don't think too many Rangers fans will really be different. But the same could be said for a lot of teams, that have brought in players. It's it is.
This Josh, by the way, is Al just strategising early on so that he has to avoid making any predictions later on at the end of the podcast. So just get that out there early on. Now you mentioned it. You mentioned a very important point, Josh. It's basically a massive rebuild that Michael Beale's faced with and is undergoing. But across the city at Celtic, Brent, it's a new manager, but essentially it looks as though he's just kind of fine-tuning a team that was already in place and successful.
Yeah, I mean, to take the players that Rangers have signed, I think I was right. There's a lot of the unknown with this, and I think that you've got a few different types of signings. You've got someone like Cantwell who, if you remember, catch mine back to January, Beale was always speaking about meeting players face to face and really emphasising using phrases like looking in their eyes. And that can be a bit cliche, but he said a line that stuck with me then. He needs people who are going to grow in front of 50,000 and not shrink. And that's what Rangers needed. I think what any good Rangers team needs is characters like Todd Cantwell or Nico Raskin who are going to thrive under that. Now take someone like Cantwell. His career started very well. He was in the Premiership. Rangers weren't going to get him at that point. I don't know how much he'd have been worth, but a lot of millions for a young English player who was impressing in the Premier League. And I think what Beale's tried to do as well is acquiring, which I think is important, a few ready now players, some like, Cifuentes, who's going to be here any minute. Danilo, who's comes off the back of 2 titles in Holland. Someone like Dessers, who's 28. He's kind of in the prime and peak of his career. Alongside these type of players who, yes, there's an element of the unknown, but they're coming in a good place. You're signing players like Cantwell, who hadn't played for a couple of seasons. And although there was excitement about his arrival, people looked at his goals and thought, well, how is this going to translate to the kind of numbers that Rangers need in the midfield? You carry that over to this season. Someone like Sam Lammers, who I think has been the standout of pre-season. He's my pick for Rangers Player of the Season. Again, he was coming off the back of 3 seasons with, I think it was like 6 goals or something very menial. And when he was signed, it was before Dessers and Danilo, and the kind of consensus was, well, he looks good, but is this really the goals that's going to get Rangers the title? But I think what Beale is doing, and you see with Lammers' performances in pre-season, he's trying to find these gaps in the market where, again, you're not going to get Lammers when Atalanta pay, I think it was 11 million euros for him a couple of seasons ago. You have to try and get these players when maybe it's not worked out, but it's not worked out for reasons that they can control. It's not an attitude thing, or it's maybe something that some other circumstance that's led to those performances. So there is a lot of unknown. I mean, the team that lines up against Kilmarnock, that starting 11, I'm guessing probably won't have played together, because last week against Hoffenheim obviously had those injuries and sickness at centre half, which meant that it was John Leofeco and Leon Balogun. And I don't think you'll necessarily see the best of this Rangers team early on, because they'll still be getting to know one another. That's exciting in a sense, because I do think that a lot of these new signings, if you think of a Raskin, Cifuentes and Cantwell midfield, Danilo, Dessers and Lammers, there's a lot to be excited about there. The task, I think, for Michael Beale early on, when you're comparing, as you say, to across the city, an element of continuation, is making sure that you also start well and get the results while you're still getting up to peak performance. Because, again, to go back to that point, that this first month with that old firm at the very start of September with the Champions League qualifiers, it's just so significant in the course of the season.
Josh, I was just wondering, I watched the Olympiacos game, and as you're saying, I mean, I guess one of the things for me is that Rangers play quite a lot of neat football in and around the box, but maybe struggle to break teams down. I guess you would hope from a Rangers fan's perspective that as those new players gel, that they will become more fluent and more fluid and be able to do that. But I wonder if Rangers fans' principal concern at the moment might be at the back, where they haven't really added any first team players, have they? Connor Goldson looks like he's just about to return from injury. Do you think the Rangers fans will be looking for strengthening it at the back before the season's too much older?
Yeah, I think you'd struggle to probably find many contingents of the Rangers support who don't think that you need to strengthen at the back. This summer, Al's been all about the new, all about, I guess, ruthless decisions, players who've been here for a long time, forming a new core. You look at Jack Butland and goals. We've mentioned that midfield and the forward area. And I guess the defence, and Liam Balgan coming back kind of feeds into this. The defence is maybe the only area that doesn't quite scream evolution yet. Now, if you look at where we are, what are we? We're early August. Cifuentes is expected any minute. As mentioned, that would take you up to 9 signings. There's a lot of noise at the moment about exits, whether that be Kamara or Sakala. And you'd imagine that if a few exits come into place, Rangers will hope to get Champions League money as well, but there is, sufficient resources there to invest in the defence as well. I think if you look at the profile of defenders that Beale has there so far, you probably need someone on that left side of the defence who is going to give him something a little bit different, be able to step in and be quite aggressive in the midfield. Rangers play with a really high line, and I think if you look at the profile of players they signed in the front three, yes, it's all about goals and creativity and what they can do on the ball, but you signed 2 players who have played for Feyenoord, one of the really good pressing teams in Europe in the last few seasons. I think you've seen that with Sam Lammers as well so far. He's an intelligent player who knows how Beale wants to play. And, I think generally he had, again, looking at the players he had and the fact that it was another manager's squad and the amount of work that's gone on this season kind of tells you, I think, what he thought about that squad or what needed to happen for Rangers to be successful. They tended, I think, to have a solution for most domestic fixtures. I think it was 8 away games in a row they won before they lost to Aberdeen. Outside of the Old Firm games, which, save that League Cup final, I think they were very much defined by mistakes at one end and Rangers' inability to have any real threat of note up top. I think their most consistent attacker was probably Fashion Sakala, and he's not a footballer that screams consistency to me when I watch him.
Well, given the extent of the personnel changes at Rangers, can either of you scribble down a starting 11 for that game against Killie? Have you given that much thought, Josh?
Yeah, I think there's a few contentious positions. If we go through it, Jack Butland definitely in goals, absolute certainty. He's come into play. James Tavernier at right back. Who's available at centre half? Connor Goldson returning from a long-term injury, but we've seen him go straight back into the action before. I think if he was fit, it would probably be him alongside John Souttar. Ben Davies, I think he gives Rangers a lot on the ball. He has become a bit of a lightning rod for criticism at points. As a game like Rugby Park away, does it require a slightly more aerially dominant centre half perhaps? Left back, Grid van Yilmaz was generally first choice consensus until that friendly in Hoffenheim, but I'd still expect him to play there. I think he deserves a chance. The midfield, I think you're going to see Raskin probably start the season at number 6, and would probably like to see Kieran Dowell and Todd Cantwell next to him. I think that Dowell has the necessary attributes to kind of play a little bit deeper. Don't know if Ryan Jacobi played on the plastic pitch. And then the front three, I'd expect, because Seema and Lammers have played so much of pre-season, they'll be in that starting 11, and probably Cyril Dessers as well, because he's just a little bit ahead of Danilo in terms of having been with the group for a few weeks.
Yeah, I couldn't really quibble with that. I don't see too many areas where you would change that. I think if I were Michael Beale, I would definitely be going with Goldson and Souttar. I just think they're better defensively with those two, albeit it would be ideal if you had a left footer in that central defence. But Ben Davies, for me, as Josh referred to, has just been too accident prone at times. And then Cifuentes is not going to play. We know that, even though he'll probably be a first pick once he's up to speed. And I'm interested to see more of Seema, because I didn't think he was great in that Olympiacos game, certainly, but he comes with a big reputation, and obviously Brighton feel that he can still be part of their squad going forward. So it's interesting times, absolutely. And Kilmarnock down at Rugby Park, we know they had a great record last season, so it is a tricky first Premiership match.
Is that starting lineup with 1 or 2 tweaks, 1 or 2 additions, Josh, is that good enough to give Celtic a run for their money domestically and to get Rangers into the Champions League?
I think throughout the podcast you've probably gauged that a defensive addition is necessary. When Cifuentes comes in, as Al said, expect him to be one of these ready now players that's going to give Rangers something different in the midfield and will undoubtedly start. If you were to add, let's say, a different dominant profile of centre half, that's 10 players. And I think if you'd said to the Rangers support at the start of the window, here is the 10 players that are going to come in, here's the numbers, I think that would quantify the biggest rebuild in a number of years, whatever phrase Michael Beale used after that Scottish Cup semi-final. So a lot of work to be done, a lot of gelling to be done. I think there's a lot of reason for excitement at the type of football that Rangers can play when they get up to speed. But I guess the potential slip up in a season like this at the start of this season is, can you start well? Can you make sure that you give yourself the framework to then go and get the time to build and show better performances and allow these players like Danilo to get up to speed, because that first month of the season is so big, and as we all know, the first month of a season can just really set the tone for it, and I think give the manager that time and that good grace over the season to I guess have the vision and demonstrate that of what he's trying to build, and then throughout the season capitalise on that and show that through performances.
Josh, I'm just wondering, for all the reasons that Champions League qualification would be a positive thing for Rangers, is there a degree to which actually going into the Europa League might be better for them?
I think the ideal, let's call it the realistic ideal, probably is what Rangers did in 2007-8, where you have the Champions League, you have memorable nights in the Champions League, but realistically, once you get, even the group stages last season showed, the financial disparity is just insane now. So for Rangers to do what they did in the Europa League in the Champions League just is, of course, not going to happen. But with that said, you look at what they did in the Europa League that season. You look at I know Beale wasn't the manager, but obviously he was very involved with what Steven Gerrard did, and the reputation and the consistency that they developed against really good sides in European competition. But before that run under Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, I think Beale will be looking at it and thinking, yes, maybe third place is the most realistic to get European football after Christmas, especially if you have to go through 2 qualifying rounds to get there. But Rangers, I'm sure, would love to show a better face than they did in the Champions League qualifiers last season, because for all the anticipation of getting there for that night in Eindhoven, the group stage was it was a bit of a humiliating experience, I think, for the club, all told, because of just how things were on the pitch at that point. So I think probably the realistic ideal would be do well enough in the Champions League, have a couple of memorable nights, show a better face than last year, and then go and try and do something in the Europa League again.
What would be success for Rangers this season? Is it just getting any kind of silverware, or do they have to topple Celtic from their perch as champions?
Of course, any season you speak to anyone associated to the club, covering the club, at the club, the goal has to be a league title. I'm not going to surprise you by saying that, David. But I take your point that you look at the end of last season and there were still signs of progress under a new manager, despite the way that season ended. But you look at it now, Beale's had this summer, he's had a fair amount of money to spend, and he's had the time. He's had the time to embed his ideas. This is his squad. This is his era of being Rangers manager. Success for Rangers has to be winning the league title. Progress can come in many forms. I'm sure that the supporters would love to have lots of shiny things held up to the sky over the course of the season, because that hasn't happened enough in recent seasons. But yeah, absolutely. Of course, as is the start of any season, I think at Ibrox, success has to be the league title.
Right, folks, we'll just round up this podcast with prediction time. Al, I know you've been doing your best to wriggle out of this, and I respect you for that. I do. I respect you for that as a football scholar. But I'm going to.
You're not going to let me forget that, are you?
I'm going to put you both on the spot. I'll come to you first, Josh.
Well, I think I've got to say first, or I'm going to alienate the support base. But no, listen. I think if you, on a serious note, if you look at what Michael Beale did after coming in, I think there's enough evidence there to show that to bridge the gap, he needed a summer window, he needed investment, he needed players to carry out his vision. I think that he's had that. He's had this summer. I think it's now up to him to go and deliver, and I'm reasonably optimistic about what he can achieve with this group of players, and maybe 1 or 2 more additions this season.
There you go, Al. Josh is going for Rangers champions.
Listen, I don't mind. I'm quite happy to put my neck in the line, DC. I'm going to say here and now, Rangers will definitely finish top 2.
Right, okay, fair enough, Al. We'll leave it at that. Thanks to Josh Barrie of the Rangers Review and BBC commentator Alistair Lamont, and to you for listening to this edition of the Scottish Football Podcast. and another Premiership preview edition.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Radio Scotland.